How's it going, Ergonauts? And welcome back to the Ergo Cast, the final frontier for all the gossip in the next generation of open finance. In these shows, we like to explore the idea of a decentralized society by examining the defiant technology to which it will be compiled from. Now, for today's episode, we have Matt Quinn, who is responsible for the ecosystem growth over at Nervos Network. How's it going, Matt? Thank you for coming on.
Yeah, it's great, Ollie. Great to be here.
So Nervos then, what is the motivation behind the project and what is the Nervos Network? Because we have quite a lot of initiatives coming around now. What sets it apart?
Yeah, so Nervos is I would say a different take on a smart contract platform. I think this is a unique conversation when I talk about Nervos because Ergo is also UTXO based smart contracts, but I think we both know that's pretty rare in the industry. Most things are account based and kind of take inspiration and modification from what Ethereum did and kind of fixing or scaling up that model. So Nervos uses the cell model, which is UTXO based, and really just generalizes what a smart contract platform is, and can run any sort of computation, store any sort of data, and we just want to allow for any kind of system to be built on top. And I'm sure we'll get into more kind of what that looks like.
A lot of the projects about now are sort of moving towards the scaling side of things. They've got their foundation built. The groundwork sort of been laid out. How is Nervos approaching this, considering it's such a big topic?
Yeah, so the approach has always been inspired by the approach that Bitcoin has taken to scalability, to say that we need to build layers on top of the layer one chain. The layer one chain needs to be secure and decentralized. And we know there are limitations to what a blockchain can do because it's a globally distributed system that should be verifiable by anyone watching. And because of the flexibility of the virtual machine of Nervos, we can support any sort of blockchain scaling solution. So we have optimistic rollups deployed today, and we're looking at building payment channel networks. The idea is to just for that layer one chain to provide as much flexibility as possible, and then for scaling to be carried out by the layers above it.
If I was to read some of the papers that Nervos Foundation has produced, whether it's the positioning, cryptonomics, or the white paper, there is a heavy emphasis on data. The universal passport as an example. Maybe you could expand a bit on this sort of common knowledge.
Sure. So I think the concept of common knowledge usually is new to people, but it is something that we all interact with. So my favorite example is a stop sign. So if you see a stop sign, everybody stops, and society is more efficient as a result. We have all these elements or these pieces of common knowledge in our world, and we don't even think about it. It's just part of what we can take for granted. But society is much more efficient as a result. And the reason why we call it the common knowledge base is a blockchain really is a system for producing common knowledge. And if you think about it in Bitcoin, the common knowledge is all of the owners and their balances. And just with that simple amount of information, we can have a system of money. So with Nervos, we wanted to provide a system that could do that with any sort of information. So we have a naming system called .bit, and that's I guess that's a topic in and of itself. What we can do with just a naming service. And someone was on Twitter asking if we could do certificates on the web, stored on chain and all publicly verifiable. And that's another example. And I think we're only a few years into this, and we're slowly learning what the potential use cases of the technology are. But that's been the goal. It's just to provide that open-ended system to produce more common knowledge in the world.
I see. But then how would this concept of common knowledge tie in with the interoperability functionality built into Nervos? What part does Nervos play?
So every other blockchain has a cryptographic language it speaks. Bitcoin, there's a certain signature function and a hash function. That's how you produce an address. Ethereum, same thing. Zcash, same thing. Nervos doesn't have any enforced concept of what is, what constitutes an account. It really is just checking a script to see if the script checks out. So Nervos can speak the cryptographic language of any other chain, and that has been I think the current usage of that interoperability functionality is to allow someone to hold CKB using, say, their Ethereum wallet. I think in terms of like longer term implications of what we can do with interoperability and this flexibility of the chain, I'm not really sure. I mean, it becomes more of like a conversation in a bar of like what might be possible rather than kind of like this kind of forum, just because we haven't gotten there. We just need more eyes on it and more people kind of experimenting to really understand.
And you mentioned about other projects going for the accounts model. In Nervos' architecture, does it follow the same route? Is state represented in the same way?
It's UTXO based. So there is no real concept of an account. You just have, we call them cells, which are just these containers of data that can have scripts attached to them. There's a locking script, which is similar to Bitcoin, just an authorization to spend the UTXO. And then there's also, we call it a type script. It's more like an application level script, which you can enforce logic if you wanted to have token contracts, things like that, DeFi kind of applications.
And with the state model and all of these scripts, is there a virtual machine that processes them?
Yeah. So the virtual machine is based on a physical computer instruction set called RISC-V. So there's these processor standards, like ARM is one, x86 is another. They're basically languages that your computer processor speaks to translate, what, say, an operating system wants to do down to what the processor does. And that we've based the Nervos virtual machine on RISC-V, which is an open source instruction set.
Yeah, that's really interesting, to be honest. I can't recall of any other project going for that. Was there any reasons to go for RISC-V over WASM, which seems to be the big thing coming up?
Yeah. So this was definitely like a topic of discussion. So I came across Nervos in 2018, and this was when eWASM was still something that was being pursued, and Polkadot was pursuing WASM. We've looked at it as WASM is a software environment. So WASM is very subject to change, and that doesn't really fit well with a blockchain, which is very hard to change. Now, if you think about a piece of physical hardware, once chips are burnt, like nothing is, you can't change anything there. So the way that standards work with a physical processor are very different compared to software standards. And I think I haven't dug deep into the WASM implementations of other chains, but I think the thesis at the time when we started was there's going to be a lot of fragmentation in the WASM implementations of blockchains because this nature of a software standard. And if I launch a chain today and someone launches a chain 5 years in the future, what are the chances that my WASM implementation is analogous to theirs, or I guess identical to theirs would probably be better in a blockchain context.
In the blockchain context, like, for Nervos at least, like, in Bitcoin, you sort of transact resources so you can send funds, and then within Ethereum, you're transacting essentially for computation. Does Nervos' architecture have a different play on things? So, with your state model, the cell model, are you still transacting computation and resources, or is it a bit different?
The same and different, which I think with a lot of things with Nervos, it helps to really have like graphics in front of you, because a lot of these things are pretty abstract, and there's details in the implementations. But so if you think about, I guess we can start with Bitcoin. If Bitcoin, you just have like a transaction fee, you just pay. And if the miners accept that transaction, it goes through. Like it's just that simple. You just attach a fee to your transaction. If the miner accepts it, that's it. And we have estimations of like how many byte, what is the sats per byte that you should pay. Some miners will accept it, but it really is just a miner accepts the transaction. That's it. Now, Ethereum's a little different in that your transaction fee is going to have this gas calculation attached to it for that computational complexity of the transaction, and you're going to pay for each step of the gas. That gas is a bundling of state storage and state modification, computation costs. All of that is bundled in one. With Nervos, the transaction acceptance is similar to Bitcoin. There is a transaction fee attached to your transaction. If the miner accepts it, it goes through the block. There is a computational estimate of cycles, like the amount of computation that's required, but it's not bundled into this concept of gas. It really is just if a miner accepts the transaction, it's good. There are bounds on these blocks in terms of size, but I guess the point I should get to was really where Nervos differentiates, in that the state storage is a separate cost compared to your transactional cost. So if you own, say, 1,000 CKB, you can store 1,000 bytes of data on the ledger, and like that's always your space to occupy. You're not paying, a gas fee for every 32 byte storage slot that you occupy, in that block. Though those costs are completely separated. Is that making sense?
Generally, for me at least.
Okay.
One of the big takeaways from that is, because you're sort of paying for state, and there's a limited amount of state.
Yeah,
it's bounded, isn't it? So, yes. It's not like what we're seeing in Ethereum at the moment, where the ledger's just growing and growing, and who knows what it's going to be one day. For Nervos, there's going to be that cap.
Yeah, that's always been an important part of what's been built with Nervos, is to enforce some sort of constraint there on the state growth, because it's one of those things with Ethereum that probably, if they had kind of known that this would happen, or if this was an important subject, when they started, it probably would have been designed different from the start. But now to kind of try to enforce that, the schemes aren't great to bound state growth. And I think a lot of this is due to the account model and just this bundling of state. If you have, say, an ERC20 contract, you have 1,000 owners, in that single contract. And to try to bound state, I guess we're getting into state rent almost, which maybe is a topic to cover. But the cell model and UTXOs help out a lot here when we're talking about controlling state growth. Or actually, we kind of like privatize the state. The instead of it being this public resource that just grows, infinitely, it's actually owned by the owners of the tokens. And
So one of the things that comes to mind when I hear about, this state being limited, and then when I consider the fact that you guys are using a RISC implementation, is Nervos sort of designing itself for IoT at all? Is that
IoT? I don't know. I honestly don't know. I mean, it's IoT is tough because you're doing so many transactions, and I think if you're doing it in payment channels, you could. I don't know. We're kind of getting off topic almost. From our perspective, it hasn't been to design for a specific use case at all. It's been to design something that's very generalized, and that we can state with certainty that, like, we know these things aren't going to change. We're not going to, rip out the VM. We're not going to change the way computation interacts. We're not going to change pricing of things. Like, we just know that these are all fixed things that we know with certainty. And that's really been the goal. Now we get the question a lot around, like, what is this for? Like VeChain, supply chain. We don't have, a specific vertical of like, this is the chain has been designed in order to do this. It's really the emphasis has been to design something that long-term sustainable and decentralized. And I think having things be so generalized, I think helps with that, because we just don't have, the need to arbitrarily change things, or to have some group that is kind of like shepherding this thing forward. It just, similar to Bitcoin, it's just been built as it is, and it's going to run, and people, can make the, clients more efficient. We can add things onto it. But we're not going to change like the core of what it is. And I think that's important.
Yeah, it was just a thought that came to mind, considering
Sure.
the aspects with it. So the RISC-V, how would contracts work? Because, in every other project, we have a contract language to encode with.
Sure.
And they have a VM designed for that. Whereas you guys, it's completely different.
Yeah, so any language that can compile to RISC-V will work. So early on, the scripts were coded in C. We've built a Rust SDK now called Capsule, which developers are pretty happy about moving from C to Rust. But other things can also work as well. I mean, we've deployed the EVM, so we have the EVM running. There's a C++ implementation of the EVM, so that can run on the RISC-V machine. It's not very efficient to actually like execute the contracts on chain, so we use a rollup solution. But you could have other VMs deployed in a similar way, and having that ability to just compile whatever to RISC-V is pretty powerful.
It certainly lowers the barrier to entry for most people looking to get into the game. Right, and so we've spoken about change not directly, but we've spoken about the desire to not change what doesn't need to be changed.
Sure.
So as the environment changes, the crypto environment, how would Nervos adapt with this? What if the community say we want this feature so badly? Is there a DAO or anything we can take part in?
Sure. So there's an RFC process, so a request for comments, and the idea would be document the change and build consensus around it, and that would be how things would progress. I think if these are breaking changes, I mean, forks are hard. I mean, we just underwent our first hard fork a few months ago, and I think getting the entire ecosystem to upgrade their software and downstream impacts of hard forks like that is tough. And I think our approach to those kind of forks has been to make non-controversial changes. And I think there's been a precedent set by Ethereum in some ways of just like anything is up for debate, anything can be changed, and it's quite contrary to like the Bitcoin community, which is very averse to change. And I think we're somewhere in the middle, that there are these things that even in the positioning paper, there's 3 core invariants that will never change, and it's the way contracts work, data won't be messed with on the ledger. Like there are these things that are set forth as like these aren't going to change. If you think about changing the virtual machine or something like that, or changing the way the economics of the chain work, changing the issuance schedule, things like that. Like it's possible, like with any chain, you could have a critical mass of hash rate adopt a contentious hard fork. That's possible. But I think with Nervos, it's set up more to be, to evolve in a way that there's broad consensus on, but to not be open to just completely changing what people are assuming is the case.
I mean, that's a logical decision, though, isn't it?
Yeah.
You don't want people messing around with the emission schedule just without an underlying need to.
But going back to Ethereum, it's that is in some communities just the way it is, that there's this understanding that the emission schedule can just change on a whim, and even with. And this is not to be critical, because I understand, every chain has different challenges and is doing different things. Even with proof of stake and DeFi, like the idea is that the proof of stake yield needs to adjust to what DeFi returns are. Otherwise, your capital is moving away from securing the actual chain to chasing returns in these protocols that are built on top. So Yeah, I think the idea of, we shouldn't change the issuance schedule. It's, I guess from some communities it makes sense. In other communities, it's not so kind of canonical.
Mm. Mm. And it'd be even more complicated in Nervos's cases with the whole bounded state situation
Yeah,
as well.
yeah.
Yeah.
But there has been, there's one time I think there was a talk post that was posted to just say, can we allow people to store 1,000 bytes of data for one CKB? And it's, someone can post that, that's fine. But, and in terms of like actually getting that change through, it's very, very challenging.
Okay, so you have this whole RFC system for making certain changes.
Yeah.
What about in terms of incentivizing the ecosystem to grow? Have you guys got treasury going on, or how does it work if you do?
Sure. So we have a grants program. So we've handed out 20, 25 grants, something like that. We support a program called Build Club now, which is for builders on mostly on the layer 2 at this point, like Ethereum devs looking to port their applications over. We also have the Trailblazer program, which is really supporting community growth and marketing kind of efforts out of the community. I think this nature of incentivizing growth through the community is something that it's always been important to us, and I think we're constantly just ramping that up. There is a DAO called the Nervos DAO, which right now just has an economic function that you get a portion of the issuance for locking your CKB in there. But over time, more of these, I guess, decisions around governance and where funds get allocated will move into being led through that DAO function.
Mm. And seeing this DAO as a component of Nervos itself, along with many others, two notably that I've come across is not DAOs but components of Nervos is Muta and Overlord.
Sure.
Which seemed like a big aspect of Nervos, at least in time to come. Could you expand on those for us, just to give a general idea?
So Muta is a sidechain framework. I don't know quite where it has its origins. I know that the core team worked on scalable private Ethereum chains previously, and I think Muta kind of like a growth out of that. And it's a sidechain solution. I think if people look at the more recent docs or just kind of like discussions in the community, Muta has been, I guess now is really talked about as Axon, which is this sidechain solution with cross-chain kind of leanings or preferences. I think that the idea is we'll have lots of app chains that are secured by CKB, and things need to move between those chains and CKB and between those chains themselves, and keeping with the biological references of nervous system and cells. So Axon is connections between cells. So the idea is to have a high performance side chains, and Overlord is the consensus algorithm used by those chains, which is I guess starts with Tendermint, then does some stuff around signature aggregation and transaction confirmation in order to significantly increase the TPS. Yeah, there's documentation out there about Overlord. Yeah.
And for what it seems, that there is a heavy focus on interoperability itself. I'm just wondering, with this, what is your main goal in the future as time comes, using all of these moving parts?
So I think any chain has the goal of, I guess, firstly, you want to increase your presence and visibility to developers to get them to build the applications that lots of people come on and use. Critical mass of adoption. And for us, because we do have this doctrine of layer 1 needs to be secure and decentralized, the throughput is rather limited compared to, say, if you look at Near or Solana, something like that. So our goal is really to provide the solutions on top of that layer 1 that allow us to scale up. When millions of people come in to use these applications, like that, things can't break down. if things break down when all these people come in, you may not get another shot. So our goal has been to build these, additional layer 2 solutions. So there's a spectrum that people can use. Like if they really need the security of the layer 1 for what they're doing, like they can transact on the layer 1 directly, or they can go to Godwoken, which is still, secured by the layer 1, but it's a layer 2. And then these Axon chains would really have their own security models tied to the, I guess, to adjudication on the layer 1. Yeah.
So they're completely decoupled from the main chain.
Not completely. Their consensus is, so if you think about Polygon had this kind of solution early on. I can't keep track of what they're doing at this point, but if you just did like a proof of stake thing on, like, as a contract on the chain to say everyone has their coin staked, in this contract, and if 2/3 of the staked capital says we need to slash this person, then they do. So there's certainty that proof of stake function can be exercised with the security of the layer 1 chain, but in terms of the consensus of the actual chain, it's completely separated.
And is this side of things only going to be limited to layer 2 built on Nervos, or is it going to expand, and is there going to be interoperability with chains external to the platform? So Ergo, for example.
No, that's a great question. I mean, I really hadn't thought about this much, but it has been something that's starting to come up as the Axon solution gets closer to being production ready, which should be, sometime, I would say, in the next few months. I guess we'll test that in the next few months. Production ready, I don't want to give an estimate. I'm not close enough to it. But those kind of conversations around this is a great solution, and if we are bolting onto other chains, then we're bringing that promise of Nervos and interoperability closer to us. Yeah, I think it has been discussed that this could be a solution for building Ethereum based side chains, something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, when I saw the UTXO alliance formed and you guys, along with Horizon, came into the body, at least, that was one of the first things that came across my mind as a reason for you guys to join the body. Mm-hmm. Is that correct to say, or?
I think the genesis of the UTXO alliance was around, I think, just shared research problems. I think in our team, speaking with the Cardano team, it just seemed like there really was this need for UTXO chains to solve kind of similar problems. And I think the whole idea of state contention with DeFi is, it's just sitting out there. I think the Fuel team has made some posts about how they've solved it. And I think, like, overall, from a user's mind, who'd be someone just, swapping coins on Uniswap, I think that UTXO contention problem is still there. I don't think it's solved in the eyes of like a mainstream audience. I think from a research perspective, it's getting there. And, we have a solution now in, I don't know if Sway Swap is in production. I haven't looked at it, but we have something out there that shows that it can be solved. But I think that's just one of probably many problems. And I think from our end, we looked at it as these should be problems that we're solving together, because we all are working on them.
As far as my sort of inquiry goes into the platform for this episode, I feel like we've covered generally everything.
Great.
On my part. Matt, you've been fantastic. Thank you for coming on today.
This has been great.
Yeah.
Really, is there anything?
Is there anything else you'd like to add on? Maybe areas for viewers to explore in Nervos, perhaps.
Sure. So one thing I guess I find myself doing now is giving a shout out to our community members and people who are really pushing the platform forward. I think we've been at this for a few years now, and that's really starting to take. So I would say go into the Telegram chats, and there's our main Nervos network Telegram chat. There's also the Nervos Nation Telegram chat, which is more, I think, if people are want to be more active rather than just kind of asking a couple introductory questions. If you really want to get involved in the community, that's a great group. Follow us on Twitter. There's a couple blogs out there now. If you go to the Twitter, you'll find those. Yeah, I guess I should mention the Discord server. If you want to interact with the core team, or if you're a developer wanting some technical support getting started, Discord is great for that.
And there we have it. Nervos, everybody. Thank you.
Thanks, Ollie.
Take care.